How would you survive if the temperature in your bedroom dropped to -40 degrees? For pioneer families on the American frontier, this was not a hypothetical situation, but an annual reality of winter nights. Their homes were only slightly warmer than the street, and their beds turned into icy nests where sleep was not rest, but a battle for survival. Watch the video to the end to find out what one detail in the design of their beds was more important than the fire in the hearth, and why waking up in the morning was no less difficult than falling asleep. What if I told you that everything you've seen in Westerns about log cabins is only half true? The reality of the first dwellings of settlers, whether log cabins or sod houses, was far from cozy. These structures were primarily protection from the wind and wildlife, but not from the penetrating cold. Insulation was minimal or non-existent. Walls made of logs or sod inevitably had cracks and gaps. In winter, these cracks became the main routes for icy air to penetrate. Settlers plugged them with moss, mud, or rags, but the frost found new ways in. The wind literally whistled in the corners, bringing with it fine snow dust. This snow accumulated on the floor and windowsills right inside the living quarters. Often, the family would wake up in the morning and see a thin layer of frost on the blankets and walls. This meant that the temperature inside the house had dropped below zero during the night. In such conditions, the bed became the last refuge. The floor in such dwellings was often just packed earth. Sometimes it was covered with boards, but they did not fit tightly together. The cold seeped in from below, making the floor the coldest surface in the house. Any bed standing directly on the floor instantly lost its warmth. Thus, the house was one large room with different temperature zones. You could burn yourself near the hearth, and just 3 meters away, the water in a bucket was covered with a crust of ice. The whole life of the family was concentrated in this narrow heat belt near the fire. In such an environment, the bed ceased to be just a piece of furniture for sleeping. It turned into a complex engineering structure, a personal fortress. Its task was to prevent the body's heat from dissipating into the icy air of the room. The whole life was built around preparing for sleep as a means of survival. Psychologically, the cold was a constant invader that was already inside the house. It did not remain outside the walls, but penetrated clothing, food, and bedding. Every night was a test of endurance and ingenuity. The settlers understood that they could not heat the entire hut to a comfortable temperature. This would require an unimaginable amount of firewood, which also had to be harvested. Therefore, they focused on a different strategy, to heat not the house, but only the space occupied by their bodies. This shocking reality forced the pioneers to make extraordinary decisions. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think was the biggest psychological problem in such living conditions? Darkness, cold, or lack of privacy? Write about it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Are you ready to learn the truth about what a pioneer's bed really was? Most often, it was a simple wooden frame knocked together from rough planks. In poorer or temporary dwellings, there might not have been a bed at all, and the sleeping area was set up right in the corner on the floor. The presence of a primitive frame was already considered an advantage, as it raised sleepers above the icy floor. A base of intertwined ropes or wooden slats was laid on this frame. This system was supposed to support the main mattress, preventing it from sagging. The flexibility of the ropes provided minimal comfort, but over time they stretched and sagged. The key element was the mattress tick, a large and very durable bag made of canvas or other thick fabric. This bag had an opening through which it was stuffed. It was the contents of this tick that determined the level of comfort and warmth in the entire bed. The cheapest, most affordable, and most common filler was ordinary straw. It could be obtained for free after the harvest. Straw had good insulating properties, creating a thick layer of air between the body and the cold floor. However, it had many disadvantages. Straw quickly clumped together, turning into a hard and flat surface. It absorbed moisture and odors, becoming a breeding ground for insects. In addition, it was fragile, broke, and turned into fine, sharp dust that penetrated the thick fabric and pricked sleepers. A more advanced filling option was dry corn leaves and husks. They were collected in the fall and thoroughly dried. They were much more resilient than straw and lasted longer without turning into dust. Preparing this material required considerable effort. Feathers were a real luxury, not available to everyone. Families who kept geese or ducks collected down and small feathers for years. This material was light, incredibly warm, and very durable. A ticking filled with feathers was called a feather bed. A feather bed was not just a mattress to sleep on, but rather a cocoon to sink into. It was placed on top of a straw or corn mattress. The soft feathers enveloped the body, perfectly retaining heat and preventing cold air from getting in from below. Caring for these fillings was hard work. The straw and husks had to be completely replaced at least once a year. The feather beds had to be regularly taken out into the cold to be cleaned and constantly fluffed so that the feathers did not clump together. This multi-layered approach was the key to survival. How heavy do you think such a feather mattress was? But even the best feather bed was useless without one secret, which we will reveal in the next chapter. How this system actually worked. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of the pioneers' survival. It was a deep understanding of the physics of heat, although they themselves may not have known such words. Their goal was not to heat the bed, but to create an insulated capsule that would not let their own heat escape. The bed was not a piece of furniture, but a personal shelter. Let's conduct a thought experiment, a kind of mini heat measurement. Imagine that the air in the room has dropped to minus 20 degrees and outside it is minus 40. A settler lies down in bed. His body is the only source of heat, generating a constant 36.6 degrees. The first layer of defense is the straw mattress underneath. Its task is to cut off the heat drain. The earth or wooden floor is a huge radiator of cold. A thick layer of straw filled with air prevented the body from coming into direct contact with this cold and losing energy. The second layer was a feather bed, if there was one. By lying on it or covering themselves with it, people created a cloud of thousands of air pockets trapped in the down around them. This still air was heated by the body and became an ideal insulator. Next came blankets and skins, which we will discuss later. They acted as an upper shield, preventing the heated air from the feather bed from escaping upward. This multi-layered system was similar to a modern thermos. Now about the measurement. Inside this cocoon, right next to the sleeper's skin, the temperature was quite comfortable, perhaps plus 20 or 25 degrees. He was in his own warm microclimate. But just a few centimeters away, on the surface of the top blanket, it was freezing cold. The temperature there was almost the same as in the room, minus 15 or minus 20 degrees Celsius. The temperature difference was enormous. The most vulnerable spot was the breathing hole. The settlers often wrapped themselves up with their heads covered, leaving only a small gap for air. In the morning, they woke up with frost on their eyebrows and hair from their own frozen breath. The steam escaping from their mouths immediately settled as frost on the blankets. This ice, which accumulated overnight, was clear evidence of how fragile this thermal bubble was. Any sudden movement that broke the cocoon led to an instant influx of icy air. Sleep in such conditions was shallow and static. People tried not to move in order to preserve the precious heat that their bodies had generated in bed. Losing it meant starting all the work of heating the cocoon all over again. This fragile thermal capsule was their only line of defense. If you like this detailed analysis of history, please like this video. What if I told you that a blanket was more important than a gun? In the daily struggle for survival, it was the blanket, not the weapon, that separated a family from death on a cold night. Each patchwork quilt was not a decorative item, but a vital tool. They were rarely bought in stores, which were almost non-existent on the frontier. Quilts were made by hand by the women of the family. Literally any scraps of fabric that could be found were used to make them. Old clothes, flour sacks, leftover curtains. everything was put to use. The secret of the quilt was not only in the two outer layers of fabric, but also in what was between them. This inner layer, called batting or filling, was responsible for retaining heat. It was made of cotton, wool, or even just old, worn-out blankets. The thicker this inner layer was, the warmer the quilt was. The process of sewing all three layers together was laborious. It required thousands of small stitches to prevent the filling from clumping together. It was hard physical work. Quilting was often a collective activity. Women would gather for so-called quilting bees, where they would work together on a single quilt, exchange news, and support each other. It was a social event with a very practical purpose: to prepare the family for winter. They never put just one quilt on the bed. Sleeping in -40 degrees meant sleeping under a mountain of quilts. Families put everything they had on the bed: 5, 10, and sometimes 15 quilts and bedspreads. The weight of this construction was enormous. It was nothing like modern lightweight down comforters. It was a heavy, dense mass that literally pinned sleepers to the mattress. It was almost impossible to move under such weight. In addition to homemade quilts, purchased wool blankets were highly prized. Products from well-known trading companies that supplied them for trade were especially famous. These thick wool blankets were expensive, but they were valued for their ability to retain heat, even when wet. Several family members often slept in one bed to keep each other warm. It was not a matter of comfort, but pure thermodynamics. More bodies in one cocoon generated more heat. This weight was the price of warmth. How much do you think such a mountain of blankets weighed? But even 10 blankets were not enough without the top main layer, which we will discuss in the next chapter. The topmost and most effective layer in this bedding fortress was the treated hide. This element was the pinnacle of the insulation system, its impenetrable shield. No fabric produced by humans at that time could compare in its properties to natural fur. The most valuable and sought-after material was bison hide, or as it was called, bison robe. It was a large, incredibly heavy and dense hide with thick, long fur. It was the main commodity of trade and survival on the Great Plains for centuries. The uniqueness of bison hide lay in its dual function. The skin itself, being thick and dense, served as ideal protection from the wind. It did not let in drafts, which were a major problem in pioneer huts. No quilt could boast such a property. The fur, in turn, was an unmatched insulator. The thick undercoat and long guard hairs created a thick layer of still air. Settlers usually placed the hide fur side down so that it was in contact with the blankets and the body, trapping as much heat as possible. Of course, not everyone had bison hides, especially after their mass extermination. Any available fur was used. Bear skins were also highly valued for their size and warmth. They were heavy and created a feeling of complete security. In wooded areas, deer skins were used, although they were thinner and not as warm. Sometimes several skins were sewn together to make a blanket of the desired size. Any fur was better than just fabric. Obtaining these skins was a story in itself. They were either bought from trappers, traded with Native American tribes, or obtained by hunting. Processing the skins was a long and complicated process that required skill and time. It is important to understand that these skins were not like modern soft carpets. They were stiff, heavy, and often had a strong, specific odor. They were impregnated with smoke to repel insects and make the skin more elastic. The weight of such a skin, added to a stack of quilts, made the bed resemble a coffin. But this was the price of survival. A person lying under such a cover was practically isolated from the outside world. The combination of a feather bed underneath and a heavy skin on top created the perfect sleeping bag. The feather bed kept the cold from getting in from below, and the skin blocked it from above. It was the most effective sleeping system the pioneers could afford. Guess what was the biggest danger in a pioneer house besides the cold? Oddly enough, it was fire, or more precisely, an open fireplace or hearth. It was the only source of heat, but it was extremely inefficient and even counterproductive. Most pioneer cabins were heated by an open fireplace. It was the simplest structure to build. However, it had a fundamental flaw. Up to 90% of the heat generated by the fire escaped directly into the chimney. At the same time, the fireplace worked like a powerful pump. To keep burning, the fire needed a constant supply of oxygen. It sucked in air not only from the room but also from the street, drawing in icy drafts through every crack in the walls and windows. This created a paradoxical situation. It was unbearably hot near the fire, and you could get burned. But a few feet away, the temperature was almost the same as outside. The settlers were literally roasting on one side and freezing on the other. This system created constant, strong drafts. Warm air from the fire rushed upward, while cold air crept along the floor. The feet were the most vulnerable part of the body, as they were always in the icy zone. Therefore, the placement of beds in the room was a strategic task. Placing them too close to the fire was dangerous. A flying spark could instantly ignite a straw mattress. Placing them too far away meant sleeping in the cold. The appearance of the cast iron stove or wood-burning stove was a real revolution. Unlike a fireplace, the stove was located in the center of the room and radiated heat in all directions. It was many times more efficient and consumed less wood. However, stoves were expensive. They were heavy, and transporting them to the frontier cost a fortune. Therefore, only wealthy or later settlers could afford a stove. Most families in the early days of frontier settlement relied on inefficient and fuel-guzzling fireplaces. They were the center of life, where people cooked and ate, but they also made the house full of drafts. What would you choose, the inefficient heat of a fireplace or complete darkness? But fire brought another problem that required constant attention, which we will discuss. The greatest fear on a winter night was not darkness, but silence. Silence meant that the fire in the hearth had gone out. In sub-zero temperatures, this was not just a nuisance, but an emergency that threatened the lives of the entire family. An extinguished hearth meant that the temperature in the hut would begin to drop rapidly, quickly becoming comparable to the temperature outside. Rekindling the fire in complete darkness with numb hands was an incredibly difficult task. It was necessary to strike a spark with flint and steel, fan the smoldering tinder, and light the kindling. Therefore, the fire was kept burning around the clock. This required constant attention. During the day, it was easy, but at night it became a difficult task. The family could not afford to sleep peacefully through the night. This led to the need for a night watch. It was not a formal post, but the adult members of the family instinctively woke up every few hours. Either one of the spouses took on this responsibility. The task of the person on duty was simple: get out of a warm bed, go to the icy hearth, and throw some wood on the fire. It was an act of willpower, requiring one to leave the warm cocoon of bed and enter the freezing room. To make this task easier, the fire was covered for the night. Large logs were covered with a thick layer of ash. This prevented them from burning brightly, but kept them smoldering until morning. In the morning, it was enough to rake the ashes and fan the coals. However, during the most severe frosts, simple smoldering was not enough. The fire had to burn properly to somehow withstand the cold. This meant that someone had to physically wake up and add logs. Such intermittent sleep became the norm for the entire winter. There was no question of a full 8 hours of rest. Sleep was a series of short breaks between shifts at the fire. The sound of crackling logs was not just comforting, it was the soundtrack of safety. As soon as it died down, it became an alarm signal. This vigilance was the key to survival. Imagine the psychological strain. You don't just sleep, you constantly listen to the fire. This responsibility fell on the adults and was an integral part of their lives. The idea of special sleepwear, such as pajamas or a nightgown made of thin fabric, was a luxury unthinkable on the frontier. In the bitter cold, undressing before bed was not only uncomfortable but dangerous. Sleep was a continuation of the day, and clothing reflected that. Most settlers slept in the same clothes they wore during the day or in their underwear. This underwear was not thin cotton, but heavy, long johns and undershirts. Often it was a one-piece union suit or jumpsuit that covered the entire body from neck to ankles. The material for such underwear was mainly wool. Wool was preferred to cotton for one critical reason: it continues to warm even when wet. Cotton, on the other hand, when wet with sweat, instantly cooled down and began to draw heat from the body. On the coldest nights, people did not undress at all. They went to bed in their everyday clothes: pants, shirts, vests. They only took off their dirtiest outer clothing and, of course, their boots. Sleeping in clothes created additional layers of insulation. Each layer of fabric was another barrier to the cold air. It wasn't very hygienic, but hygiene took a back seat to the threat of freezing. Thick wool socks were a must for sleeping. Feet were the first target of the cold coming from the floor. People often put on several pairs of socks before getting under the covers. And of course, we mustn't forget the nightcap. This item, which now seems comical, was once vitally important. A huge amount of heat escapes through an uncovered head. A woolen or quilted cap that tightly covered the ears and neck was as important as a blanket. Women and men wore similar headgear for sleeping. They helped to retain heat and protected the hair from frost, which formed from breathing. The whole family, dressed in several layers of clothing and caps, would climb under a mountain of blankets. This was the only strategy that allowed them to survive the night when the temperature in the room dropped far below zero. Thus, the bed was only one element of the system. The people themselves, dressed in warm clothes, became part of this complex heat-preserving structure. Waking up on the frontier in severe frost was no less a challenge than going to sleep. The first thing the settlers encountered was the shock of the temperature difference. It was warm inside the bed cocoon, but as soon as they stuck their hand out, it was burned by the icy air in the room. The first indicator of the night frost was the bucket of water. The water in it, standing by the door, froze through, turning into a solid piece of ice. The wash basin on the table was covered with a thick crust of ice. To simply wash or make breakfast, you first had to melt the ice. Sometimes the bucket had to be brought to the hearth itself to thaw. This was the first and most urgent task of the morning. The walls and windows inside the hut were covered with a thick layer of frost. It was the very vapor from breathing and cooking that settled on the icy surfaces and froze. Sometimes the frost was so thick that it could be scraped off with a knife. As already mentioned, the blankets and skins on top were covered with a crust of ice from frozen breath. Any moisture in the room immediately turned to ice. The process of getting dressed was the opposite of what it is today. People did not take off their night clothes, but put their outer clothes on directly over them. The main task was to spend as little time as possible with exposed skin. The most difficult task was putting on shoes. Boots left by the door froze overnight and became as hard as wood. They had to be warmed by the fire before you could put your foot in them. The person who woke up first had the hardest job. They had to leave their warm bed and fully experience the cold of the room. Their task was to stoke the coals or light a fire and get it roaring so that the house would become at least a little warmer. Breakfast was prepared close to the fire. The whole family gathered around the hearth, reaching out their hands to the warmth. The house only really warmed up by noon, and even then only if the fire was strong enough. This daily defrosting of the world was a ritual that tempered the character. Every morning was a small victory over the elements, a reminder that the night had been survived and a new day of struggle lay ahead.
Pull it tight right here, child. The warmth stays close if the knot is secure.
In addition to obvious methods such as layering and maintaining a fire, the pioneers had an arsenal of lesser-known but very effective tricks. These tricks were the result of collective experience passed down from generation to generation. One of the most important technologies was the bed warmer. It was not an electrical device, but a metal container on a long handle. It resembled a frying pan with a lid, often with holes in it. Hot coals from the hearth were poured into this frying pan. Then it was closed and quickly ironed over the bed under the blankets. This was done immediately before going to bed. The warmer instantly removed the icy dampness from the mattress. This method was effective, but also very dangerous. A single spark could set the straw mattress on fire. Therefore, great care was required. The bed became warm, but also filled with the smell of smoke. A safer alternative was heated stones or bricks. During the day, several large flat stones or bricks were kept by the fire in the hearth. They slowly accumulated heat. Before going to bed, these hot bricks were wrapped in several layers of thick fabric to prevent burns. Then they were placed in the bed, usually at the foot. They worked like modern hot water bottles, slowly giving off heat for several hours. Another important element was curtains, but not for beauty. Windows, if there were any, were simply holes in the wall covered with oiled paper or cloth. A huge amount of heat escaped through them. A heavy blanket or old skin hung over the window, and doors served as an additional barrier. They blocked the strongest drafts, preventing the icy air from circulating throughout the room. The bed's design itself sometimes provided protection. Canopy beds in wealthy homes were not a luxury, but a necessity. The thick fabric of the canopy created an enclosed space that was easier to heat with body heat. On the frontier, curtains hung around the bed served as a canopy. They created a room within a room protected from drafts. These seemingly small things were part of the science of survival. Every heated brick, every piece of fabric hung on the wall was part of an overall strategy to combat the cold. We can see that the pioneers' sleep in winter was not rest in the modern sense. It was active, nightly work for survival, requiring engineering ingenuity, foresight, and incredible endurance. Their beds were not places of comfort, but complex defense systems. It was a system where every element was important. Straw for insulation from the icy floor, feathers to retain body heat, a mountain of blankets and skins to protect against the cold air in the room. And at the center of it all was fire, a capricious deity that demanded constant worship in the form of night watches. This harsh reality, where the line between sleep and freezing was incredibly thin, shaped the lives and characters of entire generations. It forced them to appreciate every splinter, every scrap of fabric, and every degree of heat that had been so hard to obtain. What other aspects of pioneer life or the history of the American frontier would you like us to explore? Perhaps you are interested in their diet, house construction, or hunting methods. Suggest topics for future videos in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next episodes.